Okay, so we've gone through the two kinds of the while loop, the regular while loop and the do while. And now we're going to look at the Java for loop, which is a fixed definite loop rather than an indefinite loop. So you always know how many times the for loop will run. So instead of writing a program, I'm just going to play around and show you different aspects of the for loop. You're going to be using the for loop all the time. A bit later, when we learn how to use arrays, you'll see that the for loop is a very natural way to process large groups of data. So you can run through an array with a for loop where you use the counter in the loop as the index in the array. But right now we don't know how to do that. So generally, the for loop is when I want to repeat something a fixed number of times. So let's start out, we'll create one. So it's going to be for, and then we're going to have a section in parentheses which has three parts, and those are separated by semicolons. The first part is going to be to declare and initialize any counter variables. You can have more than one here. We don't often do that. Sometimes we will though. So I'm going to go ahead and say int, and today I'm going to use CNT for count. This is one of the few places where it's kind of okay to use single digit variable names. It depends what you're doing. If it's real clear what this represents, then you should use a name that represents that, okay? So for instance, if I'm going through a set of grades, I would call this grade, singular, and it would represent the individual grade as I go through the collection. Again, that's going to be something we'll see later on. So this first part, we declare our variable. You don't have to declare a variable here if you're using one that's outside of the loop. I'll talk about that. That's an issue called scope. For throwaway variables that I'm not going to use otherwise, I'm going to declare them here. The issue is that I'm not going to be able to refer to the variable outside of the for loop. It won't exist. It'll be out of scope. The next part of the for loop is the condition, which determines whether or not it'll run. So this is just like a while loop expression. It's going to be Boolean, and it's going to be a true or false statement. If it's false, the loop won't run. Because the for loop is a pre-test loop, it's possible that it won't run at all. So for instance, oh, and by the way, I have to initialize count. So let's make count equal to 0. And then I'm going to say while count is less than 10. And notice that for the loop to run at all, that expression has to be true initially, and it is. So right now count is 0, which means that in fact it's true that it's less than 10. Now, to avoid an infinite loop, this last part of the loop is where I modify the counter. And commonly we use the plus plus, or we use the plus equal. So right now I have plus plus, which is going to increment count by 1. And then the rest of the loop is the loop body, which are the code statements that you want to perform repeatedly. So anything that I put in here, every time this loop runs, all those statements will get executed. Okay? So let's start out with a simple loop, Alt tab. It's going to print out the value of the counter. So I'll say counter is, oops, sorry about that, plus CNT count. Okay? So I'll go ahead and save this, and this is ready to run. I can go ahead and run it. And you can see counter is 0, and it runs through 9. And so one of the things you're going to see that's a little tricky is you have to be careful about the conditions you do for starting and stopping the loop. So here we started the loop by putting the counter to 0, and we said less than 10. If I wanted the loop to go to 10, I'd either have to increase this to 11 or change this to be less than or equal to 10. So now when I run the loop again, the last value is 10. Okay. You can also have loops that count down. So I can go ahead and change this and make it 10 and say, and now I have to change this, while count is greater than 0. And now instead of count plus plus, which would make it an infinite loop, because if count doesn't go down, it'll never be, it'll always be greater than 0. I'll change this to minus minus. And minus minus is shorthand for subtract 1. So each time through the loop, count will go down now. So this is a descending loop where the counter will decrease each time. And so you can see again, oops, sorry, didn't quite get that. I'm having some trouble resizing my window here. There we go. So you can see that counter started at 10, ran down to 1, and then basically the last time when it got subtracted it went to 0. Then it fails, the loop fails, because it's no longer true that count is greater than 0. Okay? Let's go ahead and put this back to an ascending loop, and I'll just show you that we can change the counter in other ways too. So let's go ahead and say while the count is less than 100, and again, for right now, this will be an infinite loop, because if count is 0, it's going to be less than 100. And if I subtract from it, it'll never get greater than 100. So it'll always be true. So the loop runs as long as it's true. So let's change this to plus plus. I'm sorry. Let's change this to plus equal 5. So what that's going to do is that's going to cause the counter to be increased by 5 each time. And usually when I write these operators, I always put a space before and after them. Okay? That just makes it more readable. A lot of times I don't do that when I write a for loop, though. Okay, so here, let's see what we get. So now you can see that we're counting by 5s, 0, 5, 10, etc. And then when we get to 95, the next one fails when it reaches 100, because it's no longer less than 100. And I could go ahead and say less than or equal, and I'll get the loop to run one more time. One of the things that you'll undoubtedly encounter, because everybody does, and you can read about it in the literature, is what's known as the off by 1 error. And that's just basically caused by setting the loop up incorrectly. So for instance, you can see that the difference between less than and equal here means the loop runs one more time. So just be aware of that. One of the reasons that we count from 0 a lot is a lot of times we use arrays that work, we use loops that work with arrays. But if you're just counting, it's quite all right to start the count at 1, right? So while 1 is less than 100, and again, what will happen is this will start, you'll see the output will start with 1 instead of 0 now. So there we go, 1 up through 96. That also changed the range, right? So because I'm adding 5 each time, all right? So that's the basic of how the loops work. You can have one, you can use the minus equal to have it go down, like I showed you before with the plus. Let's see, that's pretty good. All right, let's play around a little bit with this. I'm going to kind of throw a program together out of my head, which is not the best practice, but let's suppose that we have 5 data points here, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create some data. And let's just suppose that we've had a game tournament. So we have 3 players, and they each have a different number of wins. Okay? So int Tom wins equals 3. Int Jan wins equals, oh, you know what? I want to make it more interesting. Let's make this 13. All right, and then we'll say that Jan is a really good player. She has 25 wins. And then Betty is a mediocre player, and she has 6 wins. Okay? All right. So what I'm going to do is to show you how to kind of create a little data display, which is normally called a histogram. And this is very inefficient the way I'm coding this because we don't know how to use arrays. Later on, I'll do this with an array and it'll be more efficient. But for right now, I wanted to just show you how I can use the for loop to generate an interesting display. Okay? So I'm going to do what is called agile development here, where I'll do this piece by piece. So the first part I want to do is I want to get a for loop together that's going to print out a histogram, which is a horizontal bar chart. And so let's go ahead and change this counter to win equals 0 while win is less than. Now the first one here is going to be Tom wins. So Tom wins. And then this is just going to be win. And we'll change this back to plus plus. Okay? Okay, so instead of system out print line, I'm going to do system out print, and I'm going to print a star, that is an asterisk. Whoops. There we go. All right, now think about what's happening. Because we're doing print, it won't all be on the same line, right? So then I'm going to come down here and say Salt tab, and I'm just going to print a new line. So I'm not even going to put anything there, but that'll print a new line. Okay? All right, again, we're going to do this incrementally. So let's see how it works when we display Tom's wins. Okay, there we go. So this is the display for Tom's wins. So clearly I'm going to need, some I need a title here and some more labeling to make it clear what I'm showing, okay? So why don't we go ahead and go back up here, Salt tab, and I'm going to go ahead and print my table of results, and then Salt tab again. This is just going to be bunch of, whoops, I don't want to do the underline. Let's use the equal sign here. Okay. And just to make this neat, because I know I'm going to use this again, I'm going to put this down here as the bottom of the table. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and run our code. Oops, somehow I keep missing this when I click on it. There we go. So table of results. Okay, I need to get Tom in there somewhere too. And so one way I could do that is I could go ahead and use the printf for that part. Okay, so we have the table of results. We print the first line, and then we print let's see, Salt tab, change this to printf. I'm not sure, there's probably a shortcut for printf, but I don't know what it is. And then basically this is just going to be a variable, and we'll give it a 15 character field, and it's going to be of type S, which we haven't seen before, which is a string. And then I'm going to put the string here as literal, Tom. Okay? And so what that'll do is that'll go ahead and print out Tom, and I believe that strings are left aligned. And if that's not the case, I'll have to put a negative sign in there. So again, I'm just building this incrementally. Okay, so I was wrong about it being left aligned. So let's go back up here, and I think I can go ahead and put the negative sign in there, and that'll make it be left aligned. So run it again immediately. All right, we're getting somewhere. Okay, looks like we're going to need to add a lot more spaces here. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, and then I'll go ahead up here, and I'll put a bunch more characters in there. And then I'll go ahead and copy that line again. The reason I'm doing that is I want them to be the same so they line up when I make the table. So this is just a quick and dirty way to make a table without calculating stuff like field lengths and things like that. All right, that's looking pretty good. So now I'll go ahead and add the other characters in. So you see what I'm doing? I'm using the for loop to show visually the number of wins that each player has. Okay? So now you can see that I'm going to copy my own code, and basically this portion here I'm reusing for each of my 3 players. So I'm going to copy this, and we probably should put some comments in here. If I'd planned this all out, I would have had these first, okay? And that's not the best way to go. But because I wanted to show you how the for loop works, I decided to kind of take this approach. So, and you can see how the comments are going to help me determine what code I have to do. So print the results for Tom, and then down here at the end, print the table footer. Okay? So this part here, I want to copy for each one of my players, right? So I'll go ahead and paste this in. Let me scroll up here to the top. And again, that's Control V, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And so then our next player is Jan. So print the wins. And so this will be Jan. Jan's my wife, by the way, Janice Wolf. And so now here's the control variable, so we make that Jan wins instead of Tom. And now we can test it again. So it's always best if you write in such a way that you can test as you go. Okay, this is looking good. So Tom and Jan are looking fine. I could probably go ahead and add a couple more values here to my table footer and header, and I'll do that in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and get the 3rd player in. So Betty is the 3rd player. That's actually the name of our dog, Betty Davis. And so copy this, go ahead, paste it in. Come on back up here. This becomes Betty. Our label is going to have Betty, and then the name of our variable is now Betty wins. Okay, whoops. There we go. All right, while I'm here, I just remembered that I need to add these, so I'm going to do it 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I don't have to copy it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then we run. There we go. So here's our simple histogram. Table of results. That's our header. There's our footer. And then this part here is generated using a for loop. And we're using the system out print, which doesn't include a new line. If I use system out print line, each one of those would be on a different line, and it wouldn't look like a table at all. Okay? So that's kind of cool. All right, I think that's good enough. Let's just review our for loop real quickly. Go ahead and, yep, I'm not sure why that, there we go. So the syntax for the for loop is you have for loop, you have in parentheses 3 sections. The first section initializes the counter, usually declares it too. The second section is the conditional that controls the loop, just like a while loop. The third is where you modify the counter. If you don't have this, you'll get an infinite loop, assuming the loop is true and runs it all at the very beginning. By the way, I wanted to show you something here. So you see how win is declared here in the for? Watch what happens when I try to print win out here. So Salt tab win. So I got an error, right? Run anyway. And so you can see then that I'm getting the error. The reason I'm getting the error is the win variable doesn't exist outside of the loop block. So you can't do that. Now, if for some reason I wanted to have a variable that went through the loop and got used outside of it, I'd have to declare it outside, which would be up here. So I could declare win there. Now, you don't want to redeclare the variable. So if I'm going to use win here, then I wouldn't redefine it here. I'd go ahead and take out the word int there, okay? So I just wanted to show you that's called scope. And so essentially what happens is when you declare the counter variable in the loop, that creates what's called local, a variable that's local to the loop body. So the win variable only exists here, and this is actually a different win variable that only exists within the while loop. Okay? Let's just tidy the code up a little bit so it'll be a little bit more readable for you when you get it. And there you go. So again, you should be kind of paying attention to this. So you notice how I've got everything blocked nicely. I put in extra empty spaces to make the code readable. And I sort of do that informally, but based on the sections. So here, this code that prints the table is sort of set apart from this code that presents the results from Tom. Actually, we don't really need to have a space there. That's all part of that block. And then the next section is the results for Jan, and the next section is the results for Betty. Okay, real quickly, I just want to mention this is not the best way to do this. This is the best way that we know at this point to do this. And one way I can kind of tell that it's not good is I have a lot of code that's almost identical that's repeated many times. So when I have something that I'm going to do many times, like this here, that suggests that I can code it in a different way and essentially eliminate a lot of the code in the repetition. But because we don't know some of the ways to fix that yet, that's the best way we can do it at this point in what we've learned. Okay, again, I hope you're enjoying these videos and learning a lot from them. This for loop you're going to use all the time. You're definitely going to want to know it very well and understand how to manipulate and use it. Especially once we get into arrays, you'll see there's a very natural relationship with having large data sets where you use the index as the counter in the for loop to go through the data set. All right, take care and keep coding.